So there is actually a model that, visually looking at it, combines ideas of the spiral and the waterfall model together, and that's known as the Agile model of SDLC, which, yay, thank you, very first picture, for being exactly what I'm looking for. You can tell I didn't pre-plan this at all, hint hint, wink wink, nod nod. But think of it like little miniature spirals in a row with a waterfall model. So instead of having that graph where it just keeps going on in a circle and a circle and a circle, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, like that one episode of Pinky and the Brain where the ship could only turn left, but it just kept going left slightly through land until it finally hit the area. No, think of it like this. Step 1 has little mini steps. It's building, testing, planning, required analysis, designing, so on and so forth. Once again, the actual words you put in here are dependent on what project you're actually working on. And you keep going and going and going and going and going until you at some point say, okay, step 1 is complete, or in this case, iteration 1, and then you move on to step 2, or iteration 2, and you go through the same process over and over and over again until at some point you say, step 2 is complete, and you can now move down into step 3, so on and so forth, and you can have a step 4, step 5, step 6. So basically, it's almost like a little bit of a loop involving waterfall model, but it's broken down. It's a little bit easier to understand than simply that big giant spiral graph. But the same concept of multiple iterations occur. Now, these are all sort of structures designed, for different types of things. What if you have a parallel team? What if you have like a parallel, path of some sort? And you have, multiple builds at the same time. You can have builds going on at the exact same time, multiple teams talking back and forth to each other. You can even have some little, helps when I actually spell correctly. You could also have, you can also essentially have design a process where it's like a waterfall going down, 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 and then going back up, with the middle section working as essentially a folding point, where at that middle point, these next steps will actually go back to each other. So if you did this correctly, therefore this would wind up being correct. Or you can even have it in the reverse, where if you have a situation where your later models are a chance of looking back at your previous work and rechecking yourself. Now, you'll see this more in story design type systems, which, if anyone ever takes my story design class, you'll know the case of midpoint folding, which are setups and payoffs. What happens on page 1 parallels what happens on page 120. Think about it. Every single vampire movie starts the same way. There's a dark, gloomy castle on the sun's and the night sky, and a bolt of lightning strikes the castle, mwahaha. And then what happens at the very end? Oh, it's the same castle, but now it's daytime. The vampires have been killed, and everything's nice and peaceful. Save the cat 101, midpoint folding, back and forth. Split directly down the middle of the script. And then, of course, there's also these other concepts, like, I hate all of the graphs involving this, but let's go with the Big Bang model SDLC. So, Big Bang model. Let me zoom in on you here. So, very simple graph here. We just have time, effort, and resources going into this big, giant, spiky ball of stuff. So, what would happen if you have no idea what it is you want to make? What happens if someone comes to you with a project and says, we're going to make something? What are we making? I don't know. Are we making something for how much money? I don't know the budget. What's our target audience? I don't know. So imagine, you have to just think of what you're doing. So the Big Bang Theory, which of course is, in the deep center of space, there was a little tiny itty-bitty dot, and then it expanded in every which direction with cosmic dust and stars and gases and planets and all that fun stuff. The actual scientists are going to have a heart attack on my explanation of the Big Bang Theory. But imagine here that, each and every one of these points on this big blue spiky thing is another idea. And you might use all the ideas, you might use some of the ideas, you might only use one, but at some point, with enough time, effort, and resources, you'll come up with a bunch of different ideas going out in all different directions with multiple team members or different teams or small teams or whatever. And then at some point you reconvene, you crunch it all back in and say, okay, what do we have? And what can we use from this? Once again, you might use something, you might use none of it, you might use all of it. But whatever it is you decide that works well together gets put out and that becomes your product. Or it might become multiple products because there might be multiple ideas that work well with each other. There might not be one singular idea. You might go in trying to make one massive project and instead come out with 4 small projects. It's very free-formy. But it's a different process for a different type of idea, depending on the different type of product you're trying to make. So when you're making products, go and think about what type of process you're going to make. Now, these are all design processes. I'm going to kind of fudge the SDLC concept here a bit in the next video, and instead I'm going to talk about the 6 thinking hats, which is a process for making decisions, not design, but I'll fit it in.